The morning my son handed back the envelope, I felt something inside me go very quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes before tears, the kind that comes before decisions. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started, to a Tuesday afternoon in March, 41 years ago, when I was 23 years old, standing in a hospital corridor holding a baby boy who had no father to speak of, and making a promise I intended to keep for the rest of my life. I would give him everything, not everything I had, because back then I had almost nothing. Everything I could build, every hour I could work, every dollar I could save. His name was Daniel, and for a long time, he was the only good thing in my life, so I poured all of it into him, all of me. I want you to understand something before we go any further, because it matters for what comes later. I have worked as a night custodian at Reedsville Regional Medical Center for 34 years. I know what that sounds like to some people. I know how certain kinds of people hear hospital janitor and quietly rearrange their opinion of you. They smile a little less. They listen a little less. They assume, without meaning to, or maybe meaning to entirely, that your life must be small. My life has not been small. I raised my son alone in a 2-bedroom apartment on Callaway Street. I packed his lunches and attended every single school play and drove him to SAT prep every Saturday morning before my shift started. I watched him become a young man who stood straight and spoke clearly and seemed, for a long time, to understand the value of hard work. He went to college on a combination of scholarships and money I had quietly set aside for years in an account I never touched. He graduated with honors. He got a good job at a financial consulting firm in the city. He met a woman named Courtney. That is when things began, slowly, to change. I want to be fair. Courtney is not entirely a bad person. I have thought about this carefully because I am 63 years old and I have learned that easy answers are usually wrong answers. She came from money, not obscene money, but comfortable money, the kind where you grow up assuming certain things about the world, about who matters and how you can tell. She was not cruel, so much as certain. Certain that she understood how the world worked. Certain that my son had married up. Certain, in the way that people like her often are, that a woman who mops hospital corridors at 2 a.m. is a supporting character in someone else's story. I noticed it gradually, the way she would redirect conversations at dinner, the way she would answer questions that were directed at me, the way she laughed, light and quick, when Daniel mentioned where I worked. Not a mean laugh, just a laugh that said, "Isn't that quaint? Isn't that a detail?" Daniel noticed none of it, or he noticed and decided not to see. That is a choice people make, and I have learned not to judge it too quickly, because love makes people into complicated things. The graduation party was Courtney's idea. Daniel had gone back to school part-time, working toward his MBA. It had taken him 4 years while holding down his full-time job, and I was proud of him in a way I could not fully put into words. The night he called to tell me he had finished his last exam, I sat in my kitchen for a long time after we hung up and just let myself feel it. My boy had done something hard. He had stayed with it. Whatever came later, I want you to know I was proud. The party was at their house, a colonial in Whitmore Heights that they had bought 2 years earlier, the kind of neighborhood with landscaped medians and HOA newsletters, and people who smiled at you differently depending on what car you drove. About 60 guests, his colleagues, her friends, her parents, a handful of people from their church. I knew almost no one. I wore a navy dress I had bought at a consignment shop on Merchant Avenue. It was a good dress. I want to say that plainly. It was a good dress that fit me well and cost $18, and I was not ashamed of it. I had brought Daniel a gift. I had thought for a long time about what to give him. Courtney had suggested, very nicely, that they did not really need things. They had the house, They had their salaries. Perhaps a gift card to a nice restaurant would be lovely. I smiled and said, of course. And then I wrapped what I had actually decided to give him, and I put it in a small box with a card I had written by hand. And I drove to Whitmore Heights on a Saturday afternoon in June. And I told myself that whatever happened, I was proud. What was in the box was a letter and a key. The letter explained the account. The account I had opened in 1987, the year Daniel was born, at Meridian Savings Bank on Fallow Street, which had since been acquired twice over and was now part of a regional bank called First Cornerstone. The account into which I had deposited a portion of every paycheck for 34 years. The account I had never withdrawn from, not once, not for the car that broke down in 2003, not for the winter the furnace died, not for the unexpected surgery in 2018 that cost me 3 weeks of work. I had found other ways. I had always found other ways because that account was not for me. The key was to a safety deposit box at the same bank which held the original records. The total, as of the most recent statement I had printed and folded into the envelope, was $412,000. To some people, $400,000 is not remarkable. To other people, it is a life. It is what 34 years of night shifts and skipped vacations and secondhand dresses look like when you take care of them. I had not told Daniel about any of it, not because I was hiding something, but because I had always planned to give it to him when he had actually become the man I was raising him to be, when he had finished something hard, when he had proven to himself that he did not need it to survive. I wanted it to be a beginning, not a crutch. I believed that moment was now. The party was loud when I arrived, bright with June afternoon light and catered food on long tables and a bartender who had been hired for the occasion. Courtney greeted me at the door with the kind of hug that doesn't quite reach you. She looked beautiful. Her parents were there, her father, a retired corporate attorney, her mother, the kind of woman who volunteers at benefits and knows the names of the right people. They were perfectly pleasant to me, the way you are pleasant to someone you have already categorized. I found Daniel by the back patio. He looked happy, which made me happy. We talked for a few minutes, just the two of us, and it felt like it used to before Whitmore Heights, before the catered parties, before Courtney's orbit reshaped his. Later, after the food, he gathered everyone in the living room. He made a short speech, grateful, a little self-deprecating, charming in the way he had always been. People toasted. I sat near the back and watched my son and felt all the complicated feelings you feel when you have given 34 years to a project and the project is standing in front of you, imperfect and remarkable, and you do not know yet whether the most important parts held. Then he opened gifts. Most were envelopes, gift cards, checks, bottles of wine. There was a leather portfolio from his firm, a Mont Blanc pen set from Courtney's parents, presented with the kind of quiet significance that lets everyone know it was expensive. When he got to my box, he smiled at me across the room. He opened it. He took out the letter and the key. He read enough of the letter to understand what it was. And then Courtney leaned over, the way you lean toward your husband at a party when you want to say something privately, but not quite privately enough. And she said, "Is that a letter from your bank? Is this a savings account?" Her voice was not loud, but the room had gotten slightly quieter the way rooms do, and several people heard her. Daniel said something to her I couldn't catch. She said, "Honey, that's sweet. That's really sweet that she saved up." She looked up and across the room at me with an expression I can only describe as kind pity. The worst kind of condescension because the person wearing it genuinely believes they are being generous. We can put it toward the vacation fund. And then, her father, the retired attorney, leaned over to look at the letter, and he said something to Courtney, and she laughed. That light, quick laugh. And she said to Daniel, just loud enough, "We were expecting something a little more substantial from a 60-year-old woman. I thought maybe she'd been saving longer." The room didn't quite hear all of that, but I did. And Daniel, my son, The boy I had sat with through fevers and failures and every 2 a.m. crisis of his adolescent life. My son folded the letter back into the box, set the key on top, and set the whole thing on the gift table with the empty wine boxes and turned back to the room and said, "Thanks, Mom. Really. Not to me. To the room." I sat there for a moment. I had brought a small glass of white wine to be polite, and I had not touched it. I looked at the glass. I looked at my son. I looked at Courtney's mother, who was already talking to someone else. Then I picked up my purse, walked to the front door, let myself out, and drove home. Before we go any further, have you ever given someone the best thing you had, the thing that cost you the most, and watched them set it down like it was nothing? I want you to sit with that for a moment, because what I did next came from that place. I did not cry on the drive home. I am not saying that to seem strong. I just didn't have it in me. I felt something colder than sadness. I went home, made a pot of coffee, and sat at my kitchen table until midnight. And I thought very carefully. The next morning, I drove to First Cornerstone Bank on Alderman Boulevard, which was the nearest branch to my apartment. I asked to speak with a personal banker. The young man who sat across from me had the careful politeness of someone who had been trained to treat everyone the same regardless of appearance, and I appreciated that even as I recognized how unusual I must have looked. A woman in a wind jacket and sensible shoes asking to discuss a very old account. I gave him the account number. He typed it in. He looked at his screen. He looked at me. He looked at his screen again. Then he said, "Ma'am, I'm going to need to get my manager. Please don't go anywhere." I told him I wasn't going anywhere. His manager was a woman in her 50s named Patricia, who walked toward me with the measured pace of someone who has learned to move carefully when large numbers are involved. She sat down, introduced herself, confirmed my identity with 3 forms of verification, and then turned her monitor so I could see it. The account balance was not $412,000. I want to stop here and explain something I had not fully grasped until that morning. I understood the account had been earning interest for 34 years. I understood that I had been making consistent deposits. What I had not done, because I am not a financial person, because I had trusted the account to grow while I focused on surviving, was look at the actual balance in well over a decade. The statement I had printed to put in Daniel's envelope had been printed from an outdated online portal that had not been updated since Meridian Savings was acquired the second time. It had shown me the principal I had deposited. It had not shown me the interest that had been compounding since 1987. The actual balance in the account that morning was $1,144,000. Patricia said, "This is one of the oldest continuous deposit accounts we have on record at this institution. It's been compounding for 34 years without a single withdrawal. I don't see accounts like this very often." I looked at the number for a long time. Then I asked her what my options were. We talked for 2.5 hours. I asked questions I had never needed to ask before, and Patricia answered all of them with patience and without condescension. And at one point she said, "Can I ask you something? Why didn't you ever check on this?" And I told her the truth, because I was afraid that if I watched it, I would use it. And I couldn't use it. It wasn't mine. She nodded as if she understood exactly what I meant. I left the bank that afternoon having made no decisions but having gathered a great deal of information. I drove home slowly. I cooked dinner. I did not call Daniel. He called me 4 days later. He was careful at first, asking how I was, talking about the party, saying the food had been good. Then he said, "Mom, I want to apologize for the other night. I think Courtney said something that came out wrong. Something that came out wrong." I asked him what he thought it was that came out wrong specifically. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think she didn't realize how much the gift meant. And I should have said something in the moment, and I didn't, and I'm sorry for that." I told him I appreciated him calling. He said, "So, we're okay?" I told him I was still thinking. He didn't know what to do with that. and after a few more careful exchanges, we hung up. In the weeks that followed, I did something I had never done before in 34 years of working nights and spending days making sure everything was fine. I stopped making sure everything was fine. I started meeting with people. I met with a financial advisor named Gerald, who was recommended to me by Patricia, and who spent 3 sessions helping me understand what I had and what I could do with it. I met with an estate attorney named Beverly, who helped me understand what my choices were and what various kinds of documents meant. I met with a woman named Rosario, who runs a nonprofit in the Callaway Street neighborhood, my old neighborhood where I had raised Daniel, that provides transitional housing for women coming out of difficult situations. Rosario had been trying to acquire a vacant lot on the corner of Callaway and 9th for 2 years. The lot had an old commercial building on it, unused since 2019. The owner wanted $180,000. The nonprofit had $60,000 in funding. The gap had stopped the project entirely. I closed that gap. I bought the building, transferred it to Rosario's organization at below market value, and set up a restricted account that would cover the renovation costs and 18 months of operational expenses. Gerald helped me structure it so it was both efficient and permanent. I then spent the remainder of what I had decided to allocate, roughly $400,000, the amount I had originally intended to give Daniel, on a series of things I had been quietly denying myself for 34 years. I paid off my apartment lease early and bought a small house on the other side of town, 2 blocks from a good library and a bakery I had always liked. I got a new car. I made appointments I had deferred for years. I took a week in October and flew, for the first time in my life, to see the Pacific Ocean. The rest of the money I left in the account, where Gerald told me it would be more useful than I could probably imagine, properly managed, over the next 20 years. Daniel found out gradually. Not from me. The property transfer is public record, and one of Courtney's friends saw something on the county assessor's website and mentioned it at a dinner, and Courtney looked into it, and then Daniel called me. This call was different from the first one. He was not careful. He was confused and hurt and a little frantic in the way people get when a story they thought they understood turns out to have been a different story entirely. He said, "Mom, what is going on? Someone told Courtney you bought a building, that you have, that there's money." I said, "Yes." He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I told him I had tried. He went quiet. I want to be clear about what I said next because it matters. I did not lecture him. I did not list his failures or perform my pain for him or make him feel small the way certain people had made me feel small at a party in Whitmore Heights in June. I am 63 years old, and I have learned that the point is rarely to win. The point is to be understood, and sometimes, if you're careful, to help someone understand themselves. I told him, "I saved that money for you for 34 years. Every deposit was for you. I wanted to give it to you when I thought you were ready for it. And I thought you were ready. I was wrong, and that's partly my fault, because I gave it to you without preparing you for it, without ever telling you it existed or what it meant. But Daniel, I also needed you to do something in that living room that you did not do, and I think you know that." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I know." I told him that the money was gone, that the portion I had set aside for him had been redirected, that I had used it for things that felt right to me, and that what remained was mine. And I intended to use it as mine, not out of punishment, out of clarity. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry." And this time it was different from the first apology. It had less management in it. I told him I was glad. We talked for another hour. He asked about the building on Callaway and 9th, and I told him about Rosario's work, and somewhere in there I heard him becoming, for a few minutes, the boy I had raised again, asking real questions, listening to the answers. Whether that lasts is not something I can tell you. Life does not resolve cleanly. Daniel is still married to Courtney, and I do not know what those conversations look like, and I have made my peace with not knowing. What I know is this. I spent 34 years of nights in a hospital corridor making sure the floors were clean and the rooms were ready, and the people who came there frightened and sick could move through that building without slipping, without infection, without additional harm. I know what that work is worth, not in the way other people decide worth, not in the currency of marble lobbies and Mont Blanc pins and neighborhoods with HOA newsletters, in the actual way, the way that means something when everything else has been stripped away. My gift was real. It was everything. And setting it on a table with the empty wine boxes did not change what it was. It just changed what I did next. To everyone listening to this, if someone has ever made you feel that your best was not enough, I want to say this: the accounting is longer than they think. Quiet things compound. The work you do in the hours when no one is watching does not disappear just because no one is watching. Do not let anyone set you on the table with the empty boxes. You are not decoration. You are not a footnote. You are the whole story. If this reached something in you, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to be part of this community, people who believe in dignity, in long games, in the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, subscribe to Topaz Revenge. We have a lot more stories where this one came from, and I'll see you in the next one.